myself. Well, thanks so much to Anna and to all ecology colleagues for organizing this webinar, which is really great. On top of what Anna said, I just wanted to mention to that group that at IDRI, I'm also coordinating a network of EU think tank across Europe, that we're pretty much looking for more engagement with Central Eastern Europe colleagues. So really happy. I mean, should you be interested to have a chat about that, feel free to reach out to me or to Anna, and she will pass it to me. So what I'm going to present this morning is the results of a project that we carried out with colleagues at ASCA in France, Xavier Poux, who is co-author of that presentation. And it's about a large scale and let's say a full agricultural transition in the European Union. And basically, what I'm gonna show is that, yes, it's possible, it's feasible, and we might be wishing it for many reasons I will try to explain. So what is TIFA? TIFA stands for 10 Years for Agroecology in Europe. It's a future study that looked at whether agroecology was or not a credible option for Europe at a moment when it was not under attack. It was the moment where we are trying to get this in the policy agenda in 2016, 2018, which is the time frame of the first stages of the project. But now it's clearly under attack, as Anna has just shown. What I'm going to present this morning is only the biotechnical modeling, but we have a lot on the socioeconomic part that I can also discuss during the Q&A if you want. And the idea is to look at what is agroecology, what kind of assumptions can we make from a technical point of view to model it and to characterize the consequences it will have for the EU food system. So it's a modeling at the EU scale, and as you will see with some zoom on certain regions. And so we've been working a lot on regionalization, socioeconomic and policy dimensions, with few publications here and there that we can mention at some point. So just for you to know, so we published a book in France, sorry for that, Demain, Tomorrow, an Agriculture Europe, but we published a number of papers, including one that has just been published in Frontiers in Sustainable Food System around what will this agricultural Europe look like, with what implications, for example, here on land use, trade, and global food security, now working on employment and food access for consumers. Why did we develop such a scenario? Could be a question you have. Basically, at some point, and it's still relevant today, we really wanted to contribute to a debate pretty much structured around the climate smart and food security narrative. Where the two pillars of that narrative is basically we need to produce more with less, with a strong focus on yield increases and efficiency. So with a lot of scenarios being out there, assuming yield increases by 30, 50, even up to 70% by 2050, while what we are looking at is basically what we're experiencing is basically yield stagnation or even collapses in many places. And the second pillar of those approaches is basically sparing land for climate mitigation and, let's say, pristine nature conservation, implying in many cases major land use changes. And our starting point was to consider that there are a number of shortcomings in such scenarios, in such approaches. Regarding biodiversity, for example, we assume, based on a number of studies, that efficiency is not going to be enough to halt erosion of biodiversity, and in turn to sort of like counter its erosion and the fact that it is already having a negative effect on yields and on productive capacity of our ecosystem, because biodiversity is per se a production factor. And you can see it, for example, here in that publication from Matteo Denez and Al and colleagues from 2019, where you see the strong correlation between landscape simplification and the reduction in richness and evenness of, for example, here natural enemies, which reduce the ability of agroecosystems to have natural pest control and in turn negatively affect productivity and yields in many cases. Another way to put it is to basically look at how yields have been evolving over the last decades. And you see that in many countries, in Western Northern Europe at least, yields have stopped to increase or have started to stagnate in the mid-90s, and they have not resumed yet. And we are even witnessing for France, for example, an increased interannual variability on top of the stagnation, which of course raises a number of difficulties for farmers, but not only farmers. Another point, another shortcoming of the scenarios is that they are very capital-intensive scenario, which means that for many, smallholder farmers, family farms, they are basically not within reach. So what we wanted to do with TIFA is really to focus on how to maintain the productive capacity of agroecosystems on the long run through agroecology and biodiversity preservation. So the two pillars of that were developing and maintaining sub-natural vegetation within agricultural landscapes, for which we have a number of now empirical proofs that this is what we need. So I'm only sharing with you here a very old paper from Teja Chanke from 2005, showing that there is a linear relationship between the share of semi-natural habitats and the number of species in your agroecosystem, but it still holds true. And then we have a number of other empirical studies showing the same thing. And we know that a second pillar of strong agroecology and biodiversity preservation is to have low input farming in absolute terms, which is different from efficiency. We need to reduce per se in absolute terms, not only reducing per unit of product produced. So what's the model behind the scenario? What's the engine of the scenario? It's a biomass balance model, which is fairly simple, that enable to represent the food system, the EU food system, starting with the boundaries of the EU food system. So we look at how much calories and different types of product we export and import. And then we look at human food, so human plates, expressed in raw product equivalent, and then converted into calories, proteins, fat, etc., to characterize whether it's aligned with nutritional recommendations. And then we look at what comes in that human plate from the land use, so in terms of plant production, which is the result of a land use and a yield for each of the crop or the grasslands. And those plant production go to human food, of course, but also to non-food uses, and how much we need is part of the equation, but also to animal production through feed. And then we characterize in the model animal production as the combination of a herd of the different species and a productivity, an average productivity for each of the species and for each of the technical systems. So beyond those four boxes, plant production, animal production, food, and non-food uses, we model in the model the nitrogen cycle. So that can, so nitrogen can in the model comes from synthetic nitrogen application or symbiotic fixation. You can see here the rhizobium, either from crop rotation or from fertility transfer from grasslands. And of course, we model nitrogen fluxes through that goes from plant production to animal production through feed, and that can be brought back to the cropland through manure management, but of course, accounting also for losses in the whole process. So in the model, the input variables, it's a quite simple model. So with a lot of exogenously defined variables, cropping system, livestock system, diets, waste, and losses, and how much non-food uses you want. And once you put that in the model as entry parameters, then you get a good enough idea of what are the level of production, what's the resulting land use, what's the level of GHG emission, and what are the implications for biodiversity approach through a number of proxies that I will discuss. It's important to say that the first stage of TIFA were at the EU level, but then we regionalized TIFA, looking at a set of 21 agrarian regions across Europe. So with a good enough level of precision, which is still quite broad, but to enable us to think about it with a human brain and not only a black box model. So just to let you know that what I'm going to say holds true when we regionalize the whole model. So here you see the map of that, but we can discuss that in the Q&A if needs be. So what are the assumptions behind the scenario? I will go through all the boxes that I show you, the fertility management, the plant production, the animal production, the diet, and the non-food uses. And so we wanted to make explicit what we consider as a genuine agroecological system. And for us, it really starts at the question of fertility management that needs to be done at the lowest territorial level possible, which in turn implies three things in the scenario. The phasing out of soybean import, which is basically importing nitrogen, hidden nitrogen in the feeds. To reintroduce protein crops into crop rotations to really strengthen nitrogen fixation, symbiotic fixation. And three, reintegrating cropping system and livestock system to enable for nutrient cycling, but also net fertility transfer from grasslands to croplands. The second key assumption or set of assumptions relate to the vegetal production. And there we assumed a pesticide-free farming systems that basically result in an extensification of crop production and of cropping systems. And because we didn't have any references looking at cropping system without pesticide, but with a little bit of synthetic nitrogen, we took organic farming as a reference model. So we also get rid of synthetic nitrogen in the model, and you'll see that it could work under a number of assumptions that we will be discussing. The third key assumption still relates to the land use, and it's about permanent grassland. You remember this very strong pillar on semi-natural vegetation. The bulk of semi-natural vegetation in Europe are grasslands, extensively managed grasslands. And so we assume that we need to keep the 60 million hectares of grassland we have in Europe and potentially redeploy some of them in arable specialized areas to have this 20% level of semi-natural vegetation in all areas. This goes hand with hand with livestock extensification in two ways. For monogastric, having monogastrics fed mainly with leftovers and protein crops that cannot be eaten by humans, so peas, alfalfa, and so forth and so on. And for ruminants, having ruminants that are first and foremost fed on grasslands, even though there is a bit of concentrate in the ration we have modeled. The fifth set of assumptions relate to healthy and sustainable diets, so cutting on animal proteins to make space for fruits and vegetables that we underconsume at the moment. And the last but not least part is about the, let's say, priority in the way in which we use biomass. Food first, then feed, then biodiversity, then non-food use, which basically at the end of the day means that there is very few biomass left for other things than biodiversity, carbon sequestration, or food and feed. So the bioenergy sector in the scenario is quite limited. The last point to really understand TIFA, the scenario, is that those assumptions need to be considered as a set of assumptions in a systemic way. So you cannot take one out or only choose in a cherry-picking approach 2 or 3 of them. The scenario works and is coherent and relevant because you take them all at once, and that's what makes it, for us, in our view at least, relevant for the political debate. So what are the results? The results of the scenario show, basically, we presented the scenario 2 years before the farm to fork, but basically what they show is that the farm to fork targets are realistic, which is a good point here. So as we said, we start with human diets in the model, and you can see here, sorry, it's in French, that we reduced meat consumption by 50%, we reduced milk consumption by 30%, and we increased a lot fruits and vegetables consumption, basically by twice. This is made possible by strong changes in the cropping systems. As I said, those changes would lead, under the assumptions we made in TIFA, to a reduction of 30% of the vegetal production expressed in kilocalories. The bulk of the reduction being for primary cereals that we don't need as much as we need today, because basically we also assume quite significant reduction in the livestock production. And something that I did not present here because it's part of the retrospective analysis, but you all know probably that as of now, over 60% of our cereals consumed in Europe go for feed, and over 75% of all seed and protein crops go for feed as well. So when you reduce animal production, then you regain a lot of margins of maneuver regarding cropping systems. This, the nitrogen balance is ensured in the scenario thanks to strong inputs, fertility transfer from grasslands to cropland, assuming double-purpose breeds in the livestock sector, so dairy and meat breeds that enable for those fertility transfer, and also ensured by catch crop, generalization of catch crop, half protein crops and half cereals, that will supply nitrogen through symbiotic fixation. So under such a scenario, you get rid of synthetic fertilizers, and of course, you reduce massively nitrogen losses to the environment with a lot of environmental benefits. And of course, with a number of results. So first and foremost, the doctor here is really happy because the Europeans are way less sensitive to non-communicable disease, or is really angry because he has less customers. It's as you wish. We regain a lot of biodiversity by construction because we have those semi-natural vegetation in all the landscapes by 20%. And we reduce greenhouse gases emission by 40 to 47%, depending on the variant of the scenario. I will explain that in a minute. So where do the emission reduction come from? You will see that under such a set of assumptions, this is the reference. So this is the situation in 2010. So we could update it for 2020, but it would even be a bit higher. Direct and indirect emissions. So you might not find the figure you are used to, around 40 million tons of CO2 equivalent, because we have indirect emissions here as well. And in TIFA, the bulk of the reduction comes from the phasing out of nitrogen, synthetic nitrogen, rather than from the reduction in the herd, which is only by 50% of remnant herd, because of the need to maintain permanent grasslands all across the landscapes, and also because of the extensification of the herd. We did a variant or an alternative of the TIFA scenario, which is called TIFA greenhouse gases, where we assume a stronger reduction in the ruminant herd, because 20% of the grass in the best areas, in the best placed areas, could be used in biodigester to produce biomethane, together with the dejection of the dairy herd. So that enabled for a stronger emission reduction, and also for more bioenergy production under the scenario. What you see here is that we also, under such a scenario, maintain a certain level of exports, around 10 million tons of cereals, and like 3 times less of animal product exports. But the result is that as of today, because also we phase out soybean imports. So what you see in that graph that we did publish with INRAE is that at the moment, that's the gray situation, 2010, the European Union is a net importer of calories by around 12% of what it consumes. This being driven, by our massive import of soybean. Under the agroecological scenario that I've just presented, where we have all assumptions going hand with hand, the European Union would become a net exporter of calories, because basically the gain in efficiency in animal production and the changes in diets would outweigh the reduction in the total production in vegetal and animal production. So that's a major result. Of course, if you only change the supply, what you see is that our level of dependency will skyrocket. This is the TIFA supply sensitivity test that we did, and which is basically coherent with the number of attacks that were addressed to the farm to fork that didn't consider at all dietary changes in their modeling, or very likely, like in the GRC report. We were really happy to see that at some point, the European Commission, when they wanted to debunk the scaremongering narratives, the frightening narratives around the farm to fork, did use our study to show that, well, if you take all the assumptions of the objectives of the farm to fork into account, then you get to very different pictures than what the USDA, Kiel University of Wageningen have tended to show. I don't know if I have the time to do that. No, I don't have. So just to let you know that we've been working a lot on the just transition dimension as well, focusing then on France, because we didn't have enough data to really cover every European countries. But just to let you know, this report was published in 2021. We are still working now on the meat sector. It was a focus on the dairy sector, where we took into account a number of variables that I'm not going to present here, but we can come back to that in the Q&A. We also looked at the impact on consumer, on the cost of food, but again, not going to focus on that for the sake of time. Just to finish on the key policy questions this raise. Of course, the first point which is really clear, is that demand policies will play a key role. There is nothing you can do on the supply if you don't have a clear enough signal from the consumers that they are happy to go for it. But we need to move away from the responsible consumer sort of like narrative, which hasn't worked for the last 4 years, and really go for shaping food environment in a different way. And under this condition, then we can try to work on the supply side, favoring low opportunity cost livestock systems, and going for low input varieties and system redesign at the cropping system level. This would also require some industrial policies to accompany system diversification, because as of now, it's not there. So if you are a farmer and you want to re-diversify your system, there is no outlet for you. And this raises a number of questions around trade that I'm not going to address here, but we know that they are important questions. I'll stop here, and I'm happy to take questions afterwards.